Salvete amici, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, hi, my name is Sabrina and I am a first year classicist at the University of Oxford. If you're a classics nerd like me, or maybe you're just interested in getting into the classics or my university lifestyle in general, so feel free to hit the subscribe button down below and join me on my university journey. I presume if you clicked on this video by reading the title that you would already be vaguely acquainted with the classical world, whether that be reading mythological stories when you were younger, or maybe playing video games to do with classics like Assassin's Creed Odyssey, for example, or most likely that you are someone who read Madeline Miller's hit novels The Song of Achilles and Circe and really enjoyed them and thought, you know what, I want to learn a bit more about the classical world, but how? How do I get into it? Where do I start? The widespread popularity of Madeline Miller's novels alongside Rick Riordan, who wrote the Percy Jackson series, who I'm sure you are well aware of by now because I, for one, do not shut up about him, prove that there is a greater, wider interest in the classical world, but for a lot of people it still comes across as inaccessible and confusing. So I thought for this week's video I will try and give you some starting points as to how to actually get interested in the quote-unquote real classical world, moving on beyond just the mythology, but also perhaps reading more into the history and the culture. I recognise that reading ancient texts can be really intimidating for a first-time reader, so I've tried to think of texts that are generally recognised to be pretty accessible and also the staples, I guess, of the classical world. But that being said, I know that a lot of people still just really like fiction books, so I have a couple compiled here that are fictional to do with the classical world that I think you might enjoy if you haven't already read them. And then finally, because I know that a lot of people are very busy and don't necessarily have the time to read loads and loads of books, I've got a quite long list of different podcasts you can listen to while you're multitasking and doing other things like walking to school, using public transport, doing chores around the house, whatever. I've got you sorted, guys. I've got you sorted. And also I've done a little bit of research into some lists of good documentaries that are free to watch on YouTube or somewhere similar, so that you have a place to start if you don't want to read books and you just want to, you know, visually learn instead. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so this is for those of you who are perhaps a little bit nervous about getting your claws stuck into an ancient text and kind of just want to stay in the fiction realm for a while, especially stuff to do with Greek mythology. Don't worry, I got you. Although I do have a recommendation for a fiction book or like fiction series surrounding Roman history, so I'll also talk about that for a minute. But first we have Troy by Stephen Fry. Stephen Fry also wrote Mythos and Heroes, which are retellings of Greek mythology. Mythos obviously focusing more on, like, I guess, the general lore and the gods, and then Heroes focusing on the famous demigods like Hercules, Achilles, Perseus, etc. But Troy is his newest one, and it's focusing mainly on the Trojan War and the mythology surrounding that, because there is a lot more to it than you first think, considering that everyone seems to think that the Trojan War is, you know, the horse going into the city, and you know what, that does happen, but not until Roman mythology, basically. So there is a lot more that comes before it, particularly focusing within the war, all the different warriors, for example the Amazons, Achilles dying, etc. Oh, spoilers in case you didn't already know. There's a lot of information already in there that I didn't really know before, and that's coming from like a classics student. For example, all the lineages of who is descended from whom, and like what great families there are, and etc, etc. And you learn a lot about that, and it's explained very clearly in a way that's very palatable to a general audience, so I think it's very accessible for someone who wants to delve deeper into mythology. Okay, secondly we have The Silence of the Girls by Pat Barker. Now, if you loved The Song of Achilles, then I think you will love this too, especially if you liked Briseis in The Song of Achilles and you want to, I guess, learn more about the women within the Iliadic War whose voices have been throughout history just silenced, even though they are a crucial part of, you know, the emotive power behind the poem. But this book is focusing mainly on the women, like I said, and the main character is Briseis, and I guess like Circe, it's more focusing on the impact of the roles of women within these myths. I would recommend this one if you liked The Song of Achilles and Circe particularly. Then if you're curious about getting into perhaps Roman history via fiction, I would recommend Robert Harris's Cicero series, or I guess Imperium. This is the second book in the series because, look, I have a very chaotic bookshelf, okay? I often don't have the first books of series. I'd end up buying the second one or the third one, but the first one I usually take out of the library, and then, you know, that's why I end up with like loads of random books. So just imagine this says Imperium instead, but this focuses on the Roman statesman Cicero and his journey into power and becoming one of the best rhetoricians of our entire world, I guess. He is infamous for being one of the best speakers ever, but he's also a fascinating character, and his time, he lives in the late Republic, so he's constantly interacting with, you know, famous characters like Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, Octavian, / Augustus in the future. You will get a really good introduction to, I guess, Roman politics and the downfall of the Roman Republic through this series. So Robert Harris, the Imperium, I think it's the Imperium series. I'm just gonna call it the Cicero trilogy. But if you search up his name, you will find the first one, Imperium, and then you will find Lustrum, and I can't remember what the third one is called. But I guess my favorite thing about this is the way that, because I was studying Cicero at school for A-level Latin, so it was really eye-opening to me to see these figures as, I guess, actual human beings and not just these 2D figures of the past. And he really paints a good picture of all of the characters with all their different personality traits that have been passed down to us via ancient texts like Suetonius. If you are, you know, a bit scared of getting into Roman history, but you're kind of, you want to test the water a little bit, this series, 10 out of 10. Okay, so for those of you who are interested in reading some more non-fiction books about the ancient world and getting into the culture, the history of the Greek and Roman civilizations, don't worry, I got you. Although I will say this is mainly just Roman stuff because I haven't done enough Greek stuff to really give any recommendations out, so maybe in the future I'll do another update one for Greek history and Greek culture mainly. I think these are pretty accessible. Some of them I read like completely with no context behind them, just trying to read around my subject, I guess, when I was applying for uni. So I would say I would recommend them all as good starting places for people who have never, I guess, delved into Roman history before. Of course, we have the staples of Mary Beard. I do own 3 of her books. So we have, first off, we have Mary Beard Confronting the Classics, and this is a collection of her essays that she's written about a whole range of different topics, loads and loads of different topics, just delve in a little bit into for the, like, I guess, a non-specialized reader, and so you can gain a little idea of what's going on in scholarship and what people are arguing about, basically. The sort of things that she's basically done almost the whole classical world in a way, because she's gone all the way through. There's different things here. Some examples are ancient Greece, so about Sappho, Alexander, how great is he, which Thucydides can you trust, what made the Greeks laugh. Then heroes and villains of early Rome, so I guess Roman mythology, which is slightly different to Greek mythology, Caesar's murder, Roman art thief, also imperial Rome, so we have emperors, empresses and enemies, so all these different emperors, particularly the Julio-Claudians like Caligula, Nero, Augustus, Tiberius, but then also going on beyond that, so we have Hadrian, and then also we have some more Roman culture stuff like fortune telling and dream diaries, I guess, Roman dream diaries and dream interpretation, which is pretty cool, and also more like modern scholarship and stuff like how was Pompeii excavated and things. So this is like a really cool introduction to loads of different topics at once, and I guess it can be a bit overwhelming if you like literally know nothing about the ancient world, but I think it's good to throw yourself in and just embrace the chaos. So yeah, I would recommend this. I read this for my personal statement and I found it pretty enlightening. Second of her books we have is Pompeii. Now I read this and like, oh my god, it was so good. She's also done, if you don't want to read the book, she's also done a documentary on Pompeii, which I guess kind of covers the main things within the book. She goes and visits all the different villas and talks about all the artwork, etc, etc. But this is so interesting because it's focusing not only on, like, I guess the rich and elite, which normal scholarship does because it's easier to, that we have more remains left behind from the Roman elite, but also trying to figure out the lives of the poorer people, the more average people, and then looking at Roman graffiti, which is always interesting because it just looks like the underside of a table you would find at school. Very, very rude. But it's really like a great introduction to Pompeii, and I would recommend this as someone who is a great lover of Pompeii, having been there once and really wanting to visit again. This captured the spirit of it and it was very good. And last of Mary Beard's ones, we have SPQR. Now this is an absolute classic for the personal statement. I'm sure the universities are sick of it by now because this is, I guess, the most condensed version of an introduction to the Roman Empire and the Roman Republic ever. It pretty much covers its whole lifespan, going all the way from the beginnings of Rome to, I guess, the Christian Rome, and then Constantinople and Rome breaking down. And it covers everything from, like, I guess, lifestyle, culture, literature, history, but mainly history about the Romans. So this is the one to go to if you want a complete introduction to, I guess, Roman history and everything about Rome. This book will tell you. Very good, would recommend. And then we have the more controversially named How to Manage Your Slaves by Marcus Sidonius Falks with Jerry Toner. Jerry Toner is a classicist at Cambridge. I think he's the head classicist at Cambridge, but I'm not entirely sure about that. But he writes this book as a handbook, I guess, on Roman slavery from the point of view of a Roman nobleman. And it is an incredibly insightful book into the topic, the dark topic of Roman slavery. It deals with it really well. And you as the reader really come to understand, I guess, the mindset of the Romans, which is one of the key questions that scholars look at when they're analysing the past. If you are interested in the topic of Roman slavery within the empire, also, like, I guess, the average person, how it related to the average person, how it's different to perhaps, I guess, modern concepts of slavery, then this book is really good for that, and I would very much recommend it. It's very engaging because the way it's written like, I guess, like a self-help book in a really horrible, ironic way. So if you want to learn more about this, and in doing so also learn more about Roman culture, etc., then take this book and run with it. And finally we have Tom Holland's books. So I don't have the one that I actually fully read to the end, which is Dynasty by Tom Holland, but I have Rubicon instead because I found it in a charity shop and I just picked it up. But so just imagine it says Dynasty here. Although I have started this, I just haven't finished it. So Dynasty was the one I put on my personal statement because it is incredibly fascinating, talking about how Augustus Caesar managed to turn the Roman Republic into an empire and switched the whole way that politics worked, etc., and how he finished the civil wars, and how members of his family, how the dynastic family worked, and how they I guess it's very Game of Thronesy basically, and that's why I think I really enjoyed it, because it was really interesting to look into the politics of the actual figures behind these historical events. And in particular, I really liked the focus that he actually put onto the female members of the dynastic family, like Livia, who was Augustus's wife, and her crucial role in helping him turn the Roman Republic into an empire, and how her son succeeded succession instead of Augustus's blood relatives, etc. So it's fascinating, and I guess it just tracks the whole of the Julio-Claudian emperors down to, I think, Nero. Honestly, would recommend. That was really good. Rubicon as well, I've heard really good things about. I guess is like the prequel to Dynasty, but it's about Julius Caesar and Pompey's civil wars. And like when I was talking about Robert Harris's Cicero trilogy, this also follows these key characters: Pompey, Julius Caesar, Mark Antony, Crassus, Cicero, etc. So especially if you read Robert Harris's Lustrum Imperium, it can be good to gain, I guess, a more historical view of the characters as well. And Tom Holland is a brilliant historian, and he always gives a very compelling, engaging account of Roman history. So if you want to learn about how the Roman Republic actually fell and all the civil wars, how we ended up having civil wars between Mark Antony and Cleopatra and Augustus or / Octavian, then this is the book for you. Okay, so now for those of you who are feeling a little bit more adventurous and like you want to delve into the world of ancient literature and test the waters out a bit, I have compiled a little group of books that I think you might enjoy. So pre-warning, I personally think the best way to go about reading these ancient texts, if you haven't ever done this before and you don't really know a lot about them, is to listen to the relevant In Our Time podcast before you start reading the text. Now, I'll go on to talk a little bit more about podcasts after this, but that's my main piece of advice, because it can be so helpful to get a bit of background information about the author, what his intention might be behind the text, what he's actually writing about. Because if you're just reading things out of context, you're like, what? This is crazy sometimes, especially for example with Aristophanes' plays, you're like, what? So that's what I would recommend you would do. Find the related, I guess, In Our Time podcast. They pretty much have an episode for all the famous writers and poets of the ancient world on there. I'd be very surprised if they didn't have one for just dedicated to the key texts like Homer and Virgil. Do that before you start reading the text and you will thank yourself for it. I guess I've kind of given away the first 3 books that I was going to talk about, but you know what? They are staples of Western literature and Western civilization, so it's not really that much of a surprise, and they are the ones that everyone recommends anyway, so oh well. And they are, of course they are Homer the Iliad, Homer the Odyssey, and Virgil the Aeneid. These are the 3 great epic poems of the ancient world. Homer the Odyssey, Homer the Iliad, obviously the Greek epics, and then Virgil's Aeneid is a Roman epic. Talking first about the Iliad, I would say that if you read the Song of Achilles, please read the Iliad, mainly because while I absolutely love Madeline Miller's writing, she is an amazing author and I'm not trying to detract from that at all. She has taken certain liberties with different characters, especially with Achilles, so she has kind of characterized him to be a lot more sympathetic than he really is within the epic, and she kind of makes him to be this sort of soft boy that only cares about Patroclus, but in reality he only cares about Patroclus when it's too late, and he's happy to let thousands die for his anger and his pride, and he's very cruel at times as well. So I think it's important to read the original material so you can compare notes between the adaptations versus, you know, the real epic. And I would recommend the one that we are reading at uni as like the closest, I guess, translation to the real language that makes literal sense is Martin Hammond, the Penguin Classic. So if you want to read the Iliad, get the Martin Hammond version, although I think it's the E.L. Rieu, I can't say his name, R-I-E-U. He's what we used in A-levels, so he's also pretty good, but this is one, if you want to stay pretty true to the text, this is the one you want to get. I think it's also important to remember that when you're reading Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey, that they are orally transmitted poems. So by that I mean they were not composed, written down. So all of this came out of someone's brain and then they just made it up on the spot basically. And this is why when you're reading it that there are certain times you're like, this is a bit boring. Why is there so much repetitive language? Why is there so much formulae? It's because this was a poem that people just transmitted orally that they had to remember in their brain. So the only way they could really remember everything that happened was with repetition. And I just think it's crazy that almost 3,000 years ago someone was orally composing this on the spot. This amount of text without writing any of it down. Although eventually obviously it did get written down because otherwise we wouldn't have it here, but that's kind of crazy. You're an absolute madman, Homer. And this is a similar token with the Odyssey. So this is focusing, well, the Iliad is focusing on a very short period within the Trojan War, so that's 10 days within the Trojan War, about the wrath of Achilles and his fallout with King Agamemnon, who's Menelaus' brother, Menelaus being the man who Helen was originally married to, who Paris stole her from. The Odyssey is about after the Trojan War and Odysseus' return from Troy to Ithaca and the way that he just gets lost and gets delayed and all his amazing travels everywhere. So this is an adventure book about homecoming, while the Iliad is more, I guess, like a war story about grief and loss and the stupidity of man. And then we have my very beaten up version of Virgil's Aeneid. The translation that we were using is David West, and that's the one that I've been using since sixth form, so you know it's going to be good. And this is the epic, the Roman epic, and it's about the founder of Rome, the original founder of Rome, who founded the line that Romulus and Remus came from, Aeneas, the hero, the Trojan hero who escaped from the Trojan sacking, who escaped the Trojan War and went on to Italy and to found Rome. And for me personally, I think this is my favourite epic out of all the 3, even though I recognise that probably the Iliad is like more, because it is like hugely, like the Aeneid is hugely inspired by the Iliad and the Odyssey, that it deserves more credit obviously, but we have epic love stories here as well, which are kind of, they are present I guess in the other 2 epics, but not to the same extent. That we have a tragic love affair between Aeneas and Queen Dido, the Queen of Carthage, who is doomed to fall in love with Aeneas and pay for it. And we have Aeneas' struggle to try and found Rome in the midst of a civil war. So this one, very good. And then for all you mythology nerds out there, we have Ovid's Metamorphoses. Now Ovid is a really famous Roman poet, and he is he is an amazing poet. I don't have two of his other works that I would recommend. I might put up pictures here. So first off we have the Ars Amatoria, and then we have the Remedia Amatoris, I think. And those two are basically Ovid's guide of the art of love and the art of falling out of love. They are brilliant because they are two poems that are almost like, I guess, ancient handbooks to him giving advice to people about how to get the girl, for example, or how to heal a broken heart. So if you want to read two texts that are more reminiscent of the modern era, I would recommend reading those two, because they are rude but they are funny and they are relatable, and you can see how little has changed over 2,000 years really. We are all fools when it comes to love, and we all make mistakes and we all do stupid things, but don't worry, Ovid's got your back. But alongside those two works, Ovid also wrote the Metamorphoses, which is his, I guess, great epic. And it is an epic, it is written in the style of an epic, but it is slightly different to the other three because of the fact that this is focusing mainly just on mythology, and his theme is transformation. So everything that goes on within this epic is just myths about transformation within myths of transformation within myths of transformation, and it is a bit confusing when you read it. You do feel like you read it and then you just leave it and you're like, what did I even read? I can't remember a single thing that happened, but it is brilliant for that reason, and you just think, oh my god, what's going on? But this is where we get a lot of our Greek and Roman mythology from, and this is like a source material for a lot of that. So if you like mythology, read this book. I had to quickly go and change my battery because it ran out. But coming on to the last of the ancient texts that I would recommend, we have Aristophanes, The Frogs and Other Plays. Aristophanes, of course, being a comedic playwright, writing in democratic Athens, making fun of the political system, basically all of the famous figures, and he is hilarious. If you're someone who likes humour, dark humour, slapstick, crude humour, that kind of thing, this is the guy for you. We read some of his excerpts for our class civ lessons in A-level because it was part of a sect text, and honestly, it's the sort of stuff that really, it makes you kind of annoyed at the stereotype of classics being this really sophisticated, like, elitist thing, because it's so rude and crude, and you just think, if people really knew that this is what the classics is mostly like weird innuendos and and stupid jokes, I think more people would come into it with open arms. Either way, I would recommend this. They're funny, and it just shows how our humour, while it has evolved, also hasn't over 2,000 years. Okay, so those were all of my recommendations for ancient texts that beginners can read to get into the classical world and into ancient literature. And now I'm going to move on to talking about podcasts. Now, I am a huge advocate for podcasts. I think they're amazing, and I think they are probably the best way that anyone can get casually into the classics, because they allow you to multitask while you do other things. And I recognise that most people do not have enough time to be reading loads and loads of books every single week. So I think podcasts are a great alternative, mainly because you can do them when you're walking the dog, you can do them when you're cleaning the house or doing chores or going on walks, doing exercise. It's just a great way to build up your knowledge casually. And I tend to find that hearing things, or maybe that's just me because I'm an auditory learner, it's an easy way for information to become embedded in your brain and for it to stick longer too. If you're someone who's just got into Greek mythology casually because of Madeline Miller's books and you're looking to find out a bit more, and you don't necessarily have loads of time to read books alongside schoolwork, for example, do not worry. I've got the perfect podcast for you. Myth Understood is one of my absolute favourites of all time. It's two comedians who are best friends, Sarah and Paul, and so you already know it's going to be funny. Paul is a connoisseur of mythology while Sarah knows nothing, and each episode is an attempt to try and teach Sarah about the different aspects of different mythologies. At the beginning, it was mainly focused on Greek mythology, and then they moved on to different mythologies like Norse mythology, and I think they're doing Egypt at the moment. It's great, it's hilarious, it's funny. Sometimes they have guests on, they do comedic skits. It's really casual and it's fun, you know? So I think if you are looking for a way to get more into Greek mythology, then that is the way to go. If you're someone who's maybe a bit more acquainted with Greek mythology and you kind of just want to hear some people discuss ideas about it, and particularly about Greek mythology and women, then Keeping Up with the Classics is for you. It's run by two lovely girls called Maddie and Farabi. They are so intelligent, so funny, and I would definitely recommend their podcast, especially because they talk about the presentations of women within Greek mythology within our media today, and I think that's so interesting. They also happen to be applying for university as well, so it is like a very youthful podcast and you have more of the younger generation's voice, while with I think with some of the others it's more about older generations talking about, you know, their interpretations. So I think it can be useful to get a mix of different opinions as well. If you're someone who's looking for more serious academic podcasts, I have that as well for you. Of course, the staple is In Our Time, which is the BBC podcast run by Malvin Briggs, I think, where he interviews top academics in their fields about certain subjects, and every week is a different subject. Quite a niche subject as well. There's so many classics ones, so if you really just want to delve into the classical world, that's the best way to go about it, because they have the world experts discussing with Malvin Briggs all the key issues, all the key questions that are being raised in the scholarship surrounding that issue, and you will learn a lot. And I used to do that when I was practicing for my Oxford interviews. I used In Our Time especially to try and gain a wider academic view of my subject so I could be better prepared when I went for my interview. In a similar vein, we also have Ancient Greece Declassified, where we see the host interview a range of great academic guests about different topics, really interesting topics. I think the most recent one that I was listening to was the actual host himself breaking down Plato's Republic, so as a more palatable version for people who've never done philosophy before, aka me, and it was really amazing and really interesting, and I actually felt like I could follow it for once. So especially, yeah, if you're looking into trying to get into ancient philosophy, that's also a good option to look out for. The History of Ancient Greece is another one that's quite serious, quite academic and really informative, and I use that a lot for when I was doing A-level revision because it basically encompass everything that I was learning, and it's another good way of revising. Listening to podcasts is another good way of revising and an alternative to just writing notes out and doing mind maps, etc. And especially if you're an auditory learner like me, that's pretty helpful. And then finally we have Totalis Rankium, which in contrast to the last few that I've mentioned is a more casual podcast, but it's more focused on Roman history, and it is two friends basically discussing and learning about all of the Roman emperors and treating them like their top trump cards, going through all of them, ranking them based on each other. It's really entertaining, really fun, really engaging, and it's a great way to learn about things that, you know, you don't know where to start. Like, where do you start with the empire, the Roman Empire? That's what I used when I was revising again for my interviews, and also just to learn a bit more about the emperors that I was studying at the time. So those wrap up my podcast recommendations. I can't really talk about all the documentaries, there's too many of them, so I think I'm just going to link a list down below, or like articles to recommendations for documentaries if you just want to watch stuff instead of listen or read about it. But again, documentaries are another great way to A, revise if you're doing A-levels or GCSEs, or B, if you just want to learn more about the ancient world. I really hope that was helpful for any newcomers to the classical world who just want to learn a bit more about it. I've tried to include a range of different recommendations from different media to appeal to loads of different people, so hopefully you can find at least one thing for you in this giant list of stuff. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more from me, then feel free to hit the subscribe button down below. Especially if you're like an A-level student, hopefully in the next few weeks I'll be doing videos on how to do a classics personal statement if you want to apply for classics for uni, that is. But yes, hope you enjoyed the video and hopefully see you next video. Bye!